My name is June Whitaker. I'm 22, and I've lived my entire life in a town that barely shows up on a Wyoming map. Windrove. Population 361, not counting cows or ghosts. Our land used to be wheat and wild horses. Now it's dust, rust, and power lines stretching toward the horizon like skeleton fingers. My mother died when I was 13. Pancreatic cancer. She went fast, but the grief stuck around longer than her voice ever did. After that, it was just me and my dad. He ran the old garage on Main Street, passed down from Grandpa Earl. Folks brought in their busted trucks and snowmobiles, and Dad would patch them up just enough to get them to the next storm. He used to say, "Fixing engines is easier than fixing people." I never asked what he meant until I got older. Then I didn't have to. Somewhere between losing Mom and losing himself, Dad started betting on rodeos. First, it was harmless. A few bucks. Then it was our savings. Then the house. And when the bank stopped lending, he turned to someone who never should have walked onto our land, Silas Langford, CEO of Langford Renewables, the richest man in 5 counties and the coldest man west of Cheyenne. Langford didn't offer money. He offered leverage. And my father, desperate and drowning, signed away more than just the garage. He signed away me. It was a Tuesday when he came. Not that days of the week matter much in Windrove, but I remember because the morning sky was bruised, like it knew something was about to break. I was under the hood of a '98 Chevy, elbows deep in oil, when I heard the tires. Expensive ones, smooth like city shoes on dirt roads. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag already too dirty to matter, and saw the black SUV glide to a stop like it didn't belong, because it didn't. 2 men stepped out. One was tall, wiry, mid-60s, briefcase in hand. Lawyer. You could tell by the starch in his spine. The other, he was the kind of man silence followed. Silas Langford. In a gray wool coat that didn't even blink at the wind, polished boots that had never stepped in manure. His eyes scanned the garage like it was a dead animal. "Miss Whitaker," he said, like he wasn't sure if I was real or just part of the furniture. "I need to speak to your father." I told him he was at the bar. I didn't add that he'd been there 3 nights in a row. Silas nodded once, like it was expected. The lawyer, Mr. Creighton, pulled out papers. Lots of them. Contracts, terms, debt details I didn't know existed. The numbers made my throat dry. Silas didn't look at me until he said, "Your father's land borders one of our upcoming wind fields. The access we need. It cuts through your property." "And?" I asked. "And he couldn't pay his debt." "So you take the land?" "We take the land. Or you agree to our terms." "What terms?" He didn't flinch. "A 1-year civil union. Legally binding. Non-romantic. You reside on my estate, attend events as needed, and allow public perception of a partnership. At the end of 12 months, you walk. The debt is erased." I stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be your wife?" Silas's eyes didn't soften. "No, Miss Whitaker. I want you to agree to be exactly what your father signed over." I didn't say yes right away. I didn't scream no either. I just stood there, still holding the oil rag in my hand like it might protect me from what was happening. My heart beat loud enough I could feel it in my teeth. "Why?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Silas turned to his lawyer like I'd asked something beneath him. Mr. Creighton answered instead. Mr. Langford is facing increased scrutiny from board investors after a failed engagement last year. This agreement will stabilize confidence, particularly in family-backed expansion plans. Translation: he needed a woman on his arm, a prop, a story, and I was available. I laughed, sharp, cracked. You want to erase $1 million of debt in exchange for 12 months of public theater? Silas didn't blink. That's correct. Before I could open my mouth again, the side door slammed open. My father staggered in, eyes bloodshot, smelling like whiskey and shame. June, he said, like my name tasted like regret. You don't have to. You already signed. I cut him off. Didn't you? He looked down, said nothing. I felt my knees wobble. For a second, I hated him more than I thought possible. Not because of the debt, but because he hadn't even told me. You sold me, I whispered. I didn't. I thought I'd find a way out. I swear, Junie. He reached for me, but I stepped back. There was no shouting, no drama, just cold clarity sinking into my bones. I looked at Silas again. He didn't look smug. He didn't look cruel. He just looked empty, like this wasn't the first time he'd turned a woman into a solution. I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk out, slam every door behind me, and disappear. But then I saw my father, broken, pitiful, the last piece of family I had, and the land. Our land would be gone. The garage, Mom's lilac bush, Grandpa Earl's ashes under the oak. Everything would vanish, unless I became part of a world I didn't choose. I turned back to Silas, squared my shoulders, and said, When? His answer came without pause. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., County Courthouse. And just like that, I stopped being June Whitaker, girl from nowhere. I became an asset in a billionaire's damage control plan. The courthouse smelled like dust and old coffee. They made me wear a blazer to cover the grease on my forearms. I borrowed it from a waitress friend, 2 sizes too big, and still smelled faintly of fries. The room was small, sterile. A judge, a clerk, Silas Langford in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than our entire garage. There were no flowers, no music, no friends, no one to ask if I was sure. I stared at the form in front of me. Civil union, private contract, 12 months, termination clause included. Silas signed first. Efficient, mechanical. The kind of signature that looks like it's been rehearsed 1,000 times. I hesitated, and then I remembered Dad's face the night before. How he looked at me like he'd already lost everything. I signed. The judge mumbled something that sounded like, by the power vested in me, but it might as well have been a tax form. Silas didn't look at me when we left. Outside, his driver opened the back door of the black SUV. I slid in, the seat warmer clicking on automatically polished sterile luxury. 40 minutes later, we pulled up to a glass tower in the heart of Cheyenne. Langford Tower. The top floor was all his. Penthouse, views for miles, stone and steel, everything cold, perfect, untouched. This is where you'll stay, he said, finally speaking to me. Not we. You. And that's when I realized I hadn't married a man. I'd signed into silence. The penthouse had everything. A marble kitchen I was too afraid to touch. A rainfall shower with digital controls. Floors that gleamed so clean I saw more of my reflection than I ever wanted. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Silas left before sunrise and came back long after dark. Most nights, I didn't even hear the door, just the distant hum of the elevator shaft or the soft clink of a glass being set down in another room. There were rules, unspoken, but real. No knocking on his study door, no asking questions, no touching anything that looked like it had a password. A housekeeper came on Mondays and Thursdays. She never made eye contact. I tried once, offered her a cup of coffee. She smiled politely and said, "I don't speak unless spoken to, ma'am." Ma'am, I was 22 and already someone's paper wife. I tried cooking once something simple, chicken and rice. Silas didn't even come to the table. The plate sat there, untouched, until I threw it out. I stopped trying after that. Days melted together. I read the same book twice just to feel like time was passing. Watched the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows like it might speak back to me. There was a piano in the corner. Beautiful, black lacquered, and perfectly tuned. I used to play when I was little. Mom taught me a few songs. I lifted the lid once, pressed a single key. 2 hours later, a staff memo appeared in the hallway inbox. Please refrain from playing instruments in shared spaces. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it proved something. I was here. But I wasn't welcome. Not in the kitchen, not at the table, not in the silence. Just present and invisible. One morning, I opened the bottom drawer in the guest bedroom, my bedroom, and found an old shirt of mine stuffed in between the luxury linens. It smelled faintly of motor oil and summer. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching that faded cotton like it might anchor me back to who I used to be. That's when I remembered her voice. My mother. She used to say, "Don't live in borrowed lives, Junie. Don't walk around wearing someone else's shoes." At the time, I thought she meant fashion. Maybe she did. But now, sitting in this high-rise tomb, I finally understood. She meant don't shrink yourself to fit into rooms where no one sees you. She meant don't let your name be just a line on someone else's paperwork. I looked around the room. Neutral grays, clean whites, soulless furniture. It wasn't ugly, it was immaculate. But it wasn't me. And I didn't want to disappear here. Not quietly, not politely. That night, I didn't wait for Silas to come home. I stayed up, sitting at the breakfast counter in my old garage hoodie, feet tucked under me like I used to back home. I boiled water. I made tea. I drank it slowly, loudly, even just to feel something. The elevator dinged close to midnight. He walked in, briefcase in hand, jacket slung over one shoulder like he'd been carved from marble in Wall Street ambition. He looked at me, just a flicker, and walked past. "Dinner's cold," I said, even though there was no dinner. He didn't stop, but for a split second, I swore I saw something in his eyes. Not interest, not annoyance, recognition. Like he realized the ghost in his house had a voice. When the door to his study clicked shut, I stayed at the counter, and I made a decision. I would not become part of the furniture. If I had to survive a year in this glass prison, I would do it loud, real, and entirely on my own terms, starting tomorrow. The next morning, I got up early. Not because I had anywhere to be, my entire life now fit inside 4 polished walls, but because it felt like the only thing I could control was when I woke up. I started in the kitchen. There were pans still in their boxes, labels untouched, a fridge full of artisanal nonsense I couldn't pronounce. But I found eggs, flour, and a half bag of sugar in the back, so I made muffins. From scratch. Not out of kindness. Out of defiance. The smell filled the penthouse by 7:30. Cinnamon, butter, vanilla, my mom's recipe, the one she made every Saturday before church. I left 6 on a plate near the espresso machine. Not for him, for the space. Then I moved to the library. It wasn't much of a library, more like a showroom of expensive hardbacks no one had opened. Color-coordinated, pretentious. So I rearranged them by genre, pulled the thrillers out, lined up the classics, made a little reading corner by the window, with a blanket and a chair no one ever used. Then came the plants. There were 2 dead succulents near the balcony door. I replaced them with basil and lavender. Real ones. Bought them myself at a tiny greenhouse 3 blocks away. Planted them in mismatched mugs from the back cabinet. By noon, the penthouse didn't look different to the eye, but it felt different. There were fingerprints on the counter, a coffee ring on the island, a mug left beside a half-read paperback. It was small, but it was mine. That night, Silas came home as usual, quiet, fast, emotionless. But his eyes paused, just for a second, on the lavender, on the books. He didn't say anything. Of course he didn't. But I saw it. He noticed, and that was enough for me to keep going. The next few days, I kept moving through the silence like it owed me rent. I baked more, rearranged shelves, left fresh mint in a glass on the windowsill. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind the space that someone was living here, not haunting it. And I felt him noticing. Not directly. Silas never said a word. But I'd catch it in the details. The half-second pause when he entered the room, the way his hand brushed the edge of the book I'd left open on the coffee table. The fact that he started taking his coffee black just like I did. It was a game, subtle and soundless. He never spoke. But the air shifted. Then, one Thursday, something changed. I came home from a walk to find a large flat object leaning against the wall outside my room, covered in a soft cloth. At first I thought it was a mirror, or maybe a painting, but when I pulled back the fabric, I froze. It was a sketch easel, old but sturdy, with a full set of charcoal pencils untouched, and next to it a folded sheet of paper with one sentence in neat handwriting. "You left this out of your corner." No signature, no explanation, but I knew it was him. I hadn't drawn since Mom passed, hadn't held a pencil with purpose in years. That part of me got buried somewhere between grief and survival. But now, somehow, he'd seen it. Not asked, not pushed, just offered. I stared at the easel for a long time that night. It wasn't just a tool. It was an invitation to be myself, in a space that never asked who I was. And for the first time since I signed that paper, I didn't feel bought. I felt noticed. It took me 2 days to touch the pencils. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure I remembered how. Not the technical stuff, but the part where the lines mean something, where the paper becomes more than blank. But on the 3rd morning, the city was wrapped in fog. The tower windows looked like watercolor. And I knew, if I didn't start today, I might never start again. I cleared a space in the corner I'd made mine, the reading nook near the window. Moved the blanket aside, positioned the easel so the morning light would hit the page just right. And I began. At first, it was shapes, quick, uncertain strokes, circles, shadows. Nothing finished. Then came a sketch of a rusted mailbox. One just like the one back home, leaning sideways near the lilac bush. Next was a diner napkin holder, stainless steel with one side always dented. And finally fingers. My own, mostly. Cupped around a mug. Caught mid-motion. I wasn't drawing art. I was drawing memory. And it was like opening a door I hadn't touched in years. Each afternoon I'd return to the easel, add something new. A radio dial, a cracked window, my mother's favorite boots. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't meant to impress. It just felt like breathing again. And that was when Silas started lingering. He'd pause at the threshold, never fully entering, but his eyes would scan the page. Not critically, just taking it in. Once, I caught him looking at a sketch I did of a glove hanging on a fence post. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. Not in anger, in memory. That's when I realized he recognized it. The fence, the glove, the feeling. We were both drawing ghosts. He with his silence, me with my pencil. And in that quiet, unspoken exchange, something shifted between us. He still didn't smile, still didn't speak more than necessary, but he left the study door cracked one night, just an inch. And that inch felt like a mile. It happened on accident. I was looking for tape. That's it. Just some clear tape to hang a sketch on the inside of my closet. I opened a drawer in the hallway console, one of the dozens I'd never touched. And there she was. A photograph tucked between manila folders and a stack of luxury brand stationery. Not framed, not labeled, just left there. Like a wound someone never bothered to close. She was beautiful. Striking, really. Blonde. Elegant. The kind of elegant that doesn't come from money, but from knowing everyone else notices when you walk in. She was standing next to Silas, his arm around her waist, her lips at his jaw. They were laughing. I stared at it for longer than I should have. Not because I was jealous. Because it was the first time I'd seen him smile. Not the polite, camera-ready one he gave board members. A real one. Loose, warm, young. It made something twist in my chest. Not hurt, just wonder. Who was she? Where did she go? And more importantly, what did she do to him that turned that warmth into the man who offered me a contract instead of a hello? I put the photo back exactly where I found it, but I didn't forget her face, or the way Silas's eyes had looked in that frozen moment before the silence, before me. It was the first Monday I actually looked forward to. I'd just finished a charcoal sketch of the diner where my mom used to waitress checkered floors, chrome stools, sun-faded menus. The paper still smelled like graphite when the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Langford has a visitor," the front desk announced. "She says it's personal." I was halfway through tying my hair up when I heard the elevator. Then the voice, feminine, sharp, polished, like stilettos on marble. Savannah. She didn't knock, just pushed the door open with the kind of confidence that says, "I've been here before, and I plan to be again." Her presence filled the room before she said a word. Tall, icy, impeccably dressed in winter white. Her perfume smelled like money and memory, and when her eyes landed on me, something flickered. "Oh," she said, lips curling. "So it's true." I didn't answer. just stepped aside like I was a piece of furniture she had to get around. She walked into the penthouse like it still belonged to her, pausing by the bookshelves I'd rearranged, brushing her hand across the piano I hadn't dared touch since the memo. "I was worried he'd moved on," she said casually, "but now I see he's just downsized." I crossed my arms, heartbeat steady. "He's not here." She turned, tilting her head like she was studying a pet she never wanted. "I know. I was just curious. Board members are talking. The press is sniffing around." And then, out of nowhere, Silas Langford, the unbreakable bachelor, shows up with a ring on a stranger's finger. She circled me slowly. I didn't flinch. "Does he tell you what to wear? What to say? Or do you just know how to play obedient?" "I'm not playing anything," I said. "This isn't a game." "Oh, honey," she smiled. "Everything with Silas is a game, and I've always been better at it." Then she placed something on the kitchen counter, a gift bag. Inside, I'd later find a bottle of French perfume and a note. "In case he gets bored of quiet." The door closed behind her without a sound, but the chill she left behind took hours to fade. 3 days later, I saw her again. I wasn't expecting it. I was just dropping off a folder at Langford HQ routine PR materials I'd been told to carry for a corporate gala we were both supposed to attend. No staff, no assistants, just me, clutching a binder I didn't care about in a lobby that smelled like glass and ambition. And there she was, Savannah, lounging near the elevators, sunglasses pushed into her perfect blowout, laughing at something the receptionist said. When she saw me, her smile sharpened. "Well," she purred, standing straight, "the paper doll walks among us." I ignored her and pressed the button for the executive floor. She followed. "I must admit," she said, leaning in just enough for her voice to feel like smoke, "I underestimated him. I thought Silas would go for someone colder, more polished. But no, he picks the wounded stray." I kept my eyes forward, counted the seconds between floors. 12. "I mean, really," she continued, "do you even know how to hold a wine glass? Or are you just here to warm the bed while the cameras flash?" I turned then, not out of anger, but because I was tired of being the backdrop in my own life. "Must be hard," I said, "seeing someone live in the space you threw away." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, sweetheart. You have no idea what he's capable of." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not the one who walked out on him." The doors opened. Silence met us like a wall. And there he was. Silas. Standing near the conference room, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, mid-conversation with 2 partners. When he saw us, his gaze sharpened like a blade. "Savannah," he said flatly. She stepped forward like she owned the place. "I was just catching up with your wife." She spit the word like it tasted wrong. Silas didn't blink. "You weren't invited here." "Oh, come on," she said with a laugh. "We go way back. I thought I could say hi." "You made it clear last time you were finished with goodbyes." The room went still. The partners looked away. The receptionist pretended to type. Even Savannah faltered, just for a breath. Then Silas walked over to me. He didn't take my hand. He didn't make a scene. He simply placed his palm gently at the small of my back. Protective. Present. Like a line drawn in the sand. "This is June," he said, voice calm but cutting. "She's not here to play your games." Savannah's mouth opened, but he was already turning away. "She stays. You leave." No yelling. No spectacle. Just a man who finally picked a side and stood still long enough for the world to see it. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel like an obligation. I felt like a choice. After that moment in the office, I thought something had changed. For a while, it felt like it had. Silas started coming home before midnight. Once, he even asked if I wanted anything from the cafe downstairs. It wasn't affection, not yet, but it was attention. And in this arrangement, even crumbs felt like a meal. But then he pulled away again, quietly, skillfully, like he'd rehearsed the retreat. Doors that had once stayed cracked now clicked shut again. The piano stayed untouched. The easel remained exactly where I left it, but his eyes no longer lingered there. And Savannah's perfume still haunted the guest bathroom, a small bottle she'd left behind like a landmine. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. He was sitting in the study, tie loosened, glass in hand bourbon, the expensive kind. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before he even noticed. "You're shutting down again," I said. He didn't look at me. "I'm working." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You're hiding." His jaw tensed. "She got to you," I said quietly. "Didn't she?" "June, do you still love her?" He turned then, not angry, not startled, just cold. "What we have isn't built on feelings," he said. "Let's not pretend otherwise." That stung more than I let show. "I wasn't pretending," I replied. "But thanks for clarifying." I left before he could say anything else. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the easel unfinished sketch lines swimming in shadow. For the first time since coming here, I felt something worse than anger or loneliness. I felt misplaced. Like maybe I had let something grow that was never meant to live. He didn't come after me that night, or the next morning. The penthouse was quiet, like it had been before muffins and sketches and basil in coffee mugs, like I had never touched it. I moved through the space slowly, deliberately, took my clothes, my sketch pad, a single photograph of my mom, left the rest behind. No drama, no goodbyes, just a note. I wrote it at the kitchen counter where I used to sit and wait for him to notice the smell of cinnamon. Silas, you said this wasn't built on feelings, but I had them anyway. Not because I'm naive, not because I mistook politeness for affection, but because I saw something in you worth hoping for. Maybe that was my mistake. I'm not leaving out of spite. I'm leaving because I refuse to disappear again. When this contract ends, we can call it even. Until then, don't look for me. June. Cha. I folded it once. No envelope. Just wait. Then I left it next to the untouched tea kettle. I didn't expect a reaction. I didn't even want one. I just wanted out before I stopped recognizing myself. Outside, the wind hit hard. Wyoming always knew how to make a person feel small. I boarded the 8:10 bus out of Cheyenne with $34 in my pocket and graphite still under my fingernails. No destination, no plan, just space. And maybe, if I was lucky, some silence that didn't feel so empty. 3 buses and a hitchhike later, I ended up right where it all began. Windrove. The air still smelled like diesel and dry grass. The same 3 lights still blinked over Main Street like they were trying to stay awake. And the gas station, my grandpa's old place, looked exactly the same, only smaller than I remembered. I let myself in through the side door with the key I never gave back. The back office hadn't changed. The calendar on the wall was 2 years behind. A dead moth clung to the window screen, and in the corner, under a stained tarp, sat the red stool where Mom used to sit while I helped her roll receipts into the cash drawer. She always said the place smelled like sweat and stubbornness. She wasn't wrong. I curled up in the same booth where I'd done algebra and cried after she died. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the old machine that still wheezed when it heated up, and I watched the sun rise behind the pump station like it had somewhere to be. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just existed, for the first time in weeks, without performance. And that's when the memory hit me. I was 10, sitting in the passenger seat of my mom's truck, covered in grease, and grinning. I'd helped her replace a belt in the engine okay. I handed her a wrench, but she let me believe I'd fixed the whole thing. She turned to me and said, "People will try to tell you what you're worth, Junie. Don't ever let them be right unless you agree." I didn't understand it then, but I did now. I had let Silas decide my value. Savannah, my father, even the walls of that penthouse. I'd shaped myself to fit into spaces that were never mine. But here, in this grimy booth, surrounded by memory and rust, I was whole again. Small, broke, uncertain, but whole. And I knew, if I ever went back, it would be as myself, or not at all. I was restocking the cooler with off-brand soda when I heard the tires. Slow, heavy, too smooth for Windrove. I wiped my hands on a rag and peeked through the blinds. Black SUV, tinted windows, Wyoming plates, but not local. I knew it before the door even opened. Silas Langford. He stepped out like the dust didn't dare cling to his boots. Same coat, same stillness. But something about him looked undone. Not messy, just less built. He didn't walk in right away. Just stood there, staring at the pumps like they might explain how I slipped through his fingers. When he finally came through the door, the bell above it chimed like it was surprised. I stayed behind the counter. "Long way from Cheyenne," I said. He nodded once. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention the note. Just pulled something from his coat pocket and set it gently on the counter. A small box. No brand. No ribbon. Just soft leather and gravity. I didn't touch it. "Is this supposed to fix something?" I asked, trying to sound flat. But my voice cracked halfway through. "No," he said quietly. "It's not to fix anything." "Then what is it?" He looked at me then, not like a man who needed to win, but like one who finally understood what it meant to lose. "It's not a payment," he said. "It's a choice. Mine." I opened the box. Inside was a silver ring. Not flashy. No diamond. Just simple, engraved with something too small to read until I tilted it toward the light. Found, not bought. I stared at it, at him, at everything I thought I'd buried back in that penthouse. And then he said, "I didn't come to explain. I came to ask." Silas Langford, billionaire, boardroom shark, the man who once treated me like a solution, was now standing in a gas station under a flickering light, asking without asking. Not to own me, but to keep me. and I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. So I did both. I didn't say yes right away. I slid the ring back in the box and closed it, gently, like it might vanish if I moved too fast. He didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to go back to the contract," he said, "or the tower, or any version of that life where you feel like furniture with a pulse." I studied his face. It wasn't the mask he used in meetings or the ice he wore when Savannah was around. It was something rawer, more human, a version of him I wasn't sure I'd ever see again. "Then what are you asking?" I whispered. He let out a breath, not dramatic, just tired, honest. "I'm asking you to come back with me, not as collateral, not as a placeholder, not because we have to explain anything to anyone." He looked away for a second, like the truth was hard to say out loud. "I'm asking you to come back because I miss you in the room. I miss the smell of your coffee and the mess you made of my perfect bookshelves. I miss knowing someone sees me and doesn't run." I blinked, and the tears finally spilled, not because I was sad, because I believed him. I'd waited so long to hear something real, I'd forgotten how much it hurt when it finally arrived. "You said once this wasn't about feelings," I said, voice shaking. "You said it was a game." "I lied," he said. Then he stepped closer, pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, and handed it to me. I opened it. It was our original contract, signed, stamped, notarized. But now, across the top in thick black marker, one word: void. "I destroyed every copy," he said. "This one's just for you. Proof." I stared at it, then at him, and in that moment, everything snapped into place. Not like glass shattering, but like a puzzle finally clicking together. He wasn't perfect. I wasn't easy. We were messy, complicated, late to the truth. But we were real, and I'd take real over safe any day. So I picked up the ring, slipped it on. It was warm from the box, and I looked him dead in the eye and said, "All right, Silas Langford, but this time, we do it my way." He smiled, really smiled, and held out his hand. I took it. Not because I had to, not because I'd been signed over, but because this time I chose it. And somehow that made all the difference. We didn't go back to Cheyenne, not right away. Silas sold the penthouse, quietly. No press release, no statement. Just one day, the windows were dark, and the lavender I'd planted was gone. We bought a small building in Santa Fe, red stucco, sun-warmed walls, a creaky front door with a chipped bell. It used to be a bakery. Now it was ours. He handled the lease. I handled the light fixtures. He painted the walls. I painted the signs. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. We called it Gallery Found. Open Thursday to Sunday. Mostly local art, some of mine tucked in the corners like I wasn't sure I deserved the space. But people came. They bought postcards of my sketches, asked about my lines, my shadows. They called me artist, not wife, not the girl he married in silence. Just June. Silas worked the coffee bar near the back. He wore flannel now, grew a beard, laughed more. He was still quiet, but the kind that made space for people, not push them out. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the doorway like he was waiting for a ghost. But then I'd squeeze his hand under the counter, and he'd come back to me. We didn't talk about the past much, not because we were avoiding it, but because we weren't living there anymore. Life became slow, real. Morning sunlight through dusty windows, laughter with customers, late-night dancing in socks on the hardwood floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place in the room. I just belonged. It was a Saturday, midday sun. The gallery was busy, but not crowded. Jazz played softly from the back speaker, and I was helping a couple pick out a print when I saw her. Savannah, standing just outside the door. Sunglasses, silk scarf, red lips like she walked out of a memory. She didn't come in. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the open doorframe, eyes scanning the space like she was checking the weather before stepping into the rain. I froze, not out of fear, not even out of anger, just memory. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then her gaze found mine. No smirk, no sneer, just that old calculating calm, now dimmer like someone had pulled the power cord from whatever fed it before. She looked past me, toward the back. Silas was laughing at something a college student said while frothing oat milk behind the bar. He didn't notice her. Savannah did, though, and for a heartbeat, I saw it. The realization. The quiet horror of knowing she no longer lived rent-free in his mind. She turned her face slightly. The sun hit her sunglasses, turning them opaque. Then, without a word, she stepped back from the threshold and walked away. No drama, no tantrum, no final monologue. Just the sound of her heels fading against the sidewalk. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I didn't tell Silas, not because I was hiding it, but because she wasn't part of the story anymore. She was just a footnote in a chapter we'd already finished writing. And honestly, that was the real closure. That night, after everyone left the gallery and the lights were dimmed, I stayed behind. Silas had gone upstairs early, pretending he wasn't exhausted from lifting frames and pouring espresso all day. I knew he'd fall asleep on the couch again, paint still on his hands. I sat at the front counter with a cup of chamomile tea and opened my old sketchbook. Between the pages, curled, stained, almost forgotten, was the note I'd left him that day at the penthouse. The first time I walked away, I read it again, slowly, quietly. It still hurt, a little, but it didn't define me anymore. So I flipped to a clean page and picked up a pen. Dear June, not him, this one's for you. You didn't break when they told you to bend. You didn't disappear when you were treated like an afterthought. You stayed soft. You stayed kind. And you walked away when it was no longer safe to stay. That wasn't weakness. That was your power. You found your way back. Not to the same place. Not to the same version of him. You found your way to yourself. The woman sitting here tonight isn't the girl who waited for someone to see her. She's the one hanging her own art on the walls, the one signing her name in the corner, the one building a life, not surviving it. You didn't get a fairy tale, but you got something better, a story that's yours. And for what it's worth, he didn't save you. You saved you, and then you let someone in who saw the value in that. Don't forget it. Not ever. Me. I closed the book, pressed it to my chest like a heartbeat. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the windows, the kind of sound you only notice when the world's quiet enough to hear yourself think. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to run, or fight, or prove anything. I was exactly where I was meant to be. No contract, no bargain, no borrowed name, just June. And this time, that was enough. A week before the wedding, I found the sketchbook again. It had fallen behind the shelf in the back room, wedged between old catalogs and a crooked ruler I kept meaning to fix. I brushed off the dust and opened it, expecting to find blank pages. Instead, I found her. Me. That letter I wrote at the front counter, in the quiet after everyone had gone. The one I never showed anyone. Not even Silas. I read it slowly. Every line, every word. Then I flipped to the back of the page, and for the first time, I didn't close the book. I wrote more. Dear June, so you made it here. Not because someone saved you, not because it all magically worked out, but because you didn't settle. You could have stayed quiet, could have accepted enough. Instead, you asked for more. You asked to be seen, to be chosen, not used. And when someone finally stepped up, not with promises, but with presence, you had the courage to let him in. This version of you, she's still a work in progress, still soft around the edges, still learning how to stay when it's good, not just when it's hard. But she's free. She laughs more now, paints in daylight. She knows that love is not a contract. It's what you show up for every day. So when you walk down that aisle next week, do it without fear. You didn't lose yourself in this story. You became yourself through it. And that, more than any ring, is what makes this real. With love, always me. I closed the book gently, not because the chapter was ending, but because I was ready for the next one to begin. The wedding wasn't fancy. No orchestra, no aisle runner, no designer gowns, just white folding chairs under cottonwood trees, paper lanterns strung across the gallery's back patio. Rosa made tamales. Silas brewed coffee. Someone's kid brought their violin and played out of tune. But no one cared. There were maybe 30 people there. Some local artists. Vincent from the city. My old boss from the library. And on an easel near the arch of wildflowers, a framed sketch. My mother. Drawn from memory. Just the curve of her cheek, the softness around her eyes. She never saw me as a bride. But that day, I swear I felt her in the wind. The vows were short. I choose you, I said. On the good days, on the ones where the paint runs dry, on the days I want to run, I choose you still. Silas just held my hands a little tighter. I'll never deserve you, he said. But I'll never stop trying. And when he kissed me, it wasn't the end of anything. It was just a quiet promise. We're here now. Let's keep going. After the sun dipped behind the hills, the crowd thinned, and someone played a record on the gallery speaker. Old jazz, scratchy but warm. I was barefoot on the flagstone. Silas held out his hand. No one else was dancing, but we did. Slow, no rhythm, just movement. I rested my cheek against his chest, and for a moment I could hear his heart, not guarded, not buried, just open. I have something for you, he whispered. He led me inside the gallery, lights dimmed low. On the main wall, where we usually hung local pieces, there was just one new canvas. Large, textured, still drying. My name was signed at the bottom. It was us. Standing together in the desert, our gallery behind us, storm clouds far in the distance. His hand in mine. No faces, just silhouettes. But you could feel it, the quiet, the fight, the tenderness in the space between our shoulders. "You painted this?" I asked. He shook his head. "You did," he said. "You just hadn't picked up the brush yet." I stared at it, unsure what to say. It wasn't perfect. Some lines were too rough. Some color bled outside the shapes. But it was honest. It was us. Alive. Bruised. Still here. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a part of someone else's story. I felt like the artist of my own. If you had asked me 2 years ago what I wanted from life, I probably would have said something small. Peace. A job that didn't drain me. Maybe a kitchen window with sunlight in the mornings. I would have never said love. Not the real kind. Not the kind that shows up ugly and honest and stays anyway. Because back then, I didn't think I was allowed to want anything that big. Back then, I thought surviving was enough. I thought if I could just make it through the noise, through the debts, the disappointments, the days I felt invisible, then maybe I could earn a little quiet. But quiet isn't peace. Silence isn't the same as being seen. And surviving? That's not living. It took being handed over like a transaction. It took marrying a man who didn't look at me for weeks. It took walking out with nothing but a bus ticket and a sketchbook. To realize I wasn't waiting for someone to give me a better life. I was the one who had to start it. Love didn't save me. Choice did. I chose to speak. I chose to draw again. I chose to ask, "Is this all I'm worth?" and not accept the silence that followed. I think the biggest lie we're told, especially as women, is that love is something given to us. That if we're patient, pretty, polite enough, someone will come along and make life feel full. But love isn't charity. Love doesn't rescue. It meets you on the road, halfway, when you've already done the hard work of remembering who you are. If you're listening to this, and maybe you're stuck in a place that feels too small for the size of your spirit, I want you to know something. You don't have to earn the right to take up space. You don't have to be chosen to have value. You are not broken because someone else couldn't see your worth. You are not disposable just because the world sometimes treats people like debts to be paid. And you don't need permission to start over. Some days I still flinch at small things, like a door closing too hard, or someone calling my name without warmth. Healing isn't clean, it isn't poetic, it's slow and awkward and sometimes lonely, but it's real, and it's yours. The first time I laughed out loud in the gallery, really laughed. I startled myself. I didn't recognize the sound. I hadn't heard it in years, but it was mine, unbought, unborrowed. They gave me away. That part is true. They said I was the cost, the contract, the solution to a problem I didn't create, and for a while I believed them. But here's the truth. You can't be owned. Not when you know who you are. Not when you decide that you matter before anyone else does. I married him again, yes. But the second time, there was no debt, no obligation, no father whispering guilt or lawyer holding a pen. Just two people, both a little bruised, saying, "Let's build something. And this time, let's build it with both hands." So what did I learn? I learned that you can't control how you enter someone's life, but you can decide how you stay, and more importantly, how you leave when staying means losing yourself. I learned that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's survival in disguise. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of what no longer belongs to your future. And I learned that the most radical thing you can do in this world is not to fall in love. It's to love yourself enough to walk away until someone is brave enough to walk beside you. Not ahead, not behind, beside. If you're waiting for a sign to begin again, this is it. Start where you are, with what you have. Even if it's just a breath or a sketch. Even if all you've got left is your name. Because sometimes that's all it takes to begin the rest of your life.